What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, the time has come to predict the co-main event for UFC 295, Pavlovich versus Aspinall for the interim belt. Now, I personally believe that this should be for the undisputed heavyweight title, but we'll get more into that later. I want to first talk about the X's and O's of the fight because this is a great one, and then make predictions. But this seems to be about as close a heavyweight matchup as you can get.
Yeah, this is a great one. And I know that this is an interim title fight, but the skill level is certainly that of an undisputed title fight. These two guys are the right two guys to be fighting for the heavyweight crown. And, you know, Tom Aspinall looked about as good as you could possibly look, not just for a heavyweight, but for any fighter of any size in his last outing. I mean, just looked so good. He was in front of his home crowd, and sometimes that can sort of give you butterflies. It didn't bother him at all. He was able to go in there, ice in his veins, not get touched, I don't even think once, land some perfect, precise striking, just enough to show us that he's been working and evolving on things. It wasn't a lucky one-punch shot or anything like that. And then within the first couple minutes, closes out the deal, ends the night without a scratch on his face. And I really think that that was Tom Aspinall's coming out party. Of course, if you've been watching MMA for a while, you know who this guy is. He's been on your radar. And if you've been a fan from the UK, you know certainly who Tom Aspinall is. He's kind of the guy you're clamoring on to right now. After, you know, you've had your Michael Bispings and you've had even Conor McGregor, some big names come out of that region of the world. This guy feels like he could really be the one to get that next world title and to be the first heavyweight champion from the UK would be something very special. And I think, although this is a very tough fight for him to get his hand raised in, this is a pretty good one. I think Tom Aspinall has just entered his prime, and we've got a real monster on our hands.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Aspinall is actually a slight favorite. The latest odds show him at minus 120, and Pavlovich is a plus 100. So it's essentially a pick 'em, and it depends on what site you're looking at. But point is, this is as close of a heavyweight fight as you can get, both on the odds and then as far as the skills are concerned as well. Now, we know both of these guys are finishing machines.
Right.
So Tom Aspinall, all 13 fights that he's won have come by finish, 10 knockouts, 3 submissions.
Insane.
So he does have incredible jiu-jitsu as well as having heavy hands and some real finishing power. And then Pavlovich, I mean, he's absolutely a freight train when he starts unloading on you. 15 of his 18 victories come by knockout, the other 3 being decisions. And his only career loss was back in 2018 to Alistair Overeem, but he was in his mid-20s at the time, and Overeem was still Overeem at that time. Right. So certainly an excusable loss. I mean, most people lost to Overeem back then. So thinking about where this fight might take place, both of these guys are excellent on the feet. They both got great hands, but they're both excellent grapplers as well, and neither one of them move like a heavyweight. Both of them move like they could be several weight classes lower. Now, Pavlovich is going to be the better wrestler. He's got that Greco-Roman pedigree, but I think Aspinall's got the better jiu-jitsu. He's got the more submissions on his record. He's able to find subs pretty much anywhere. He can choke you out. He can submit you with some sort of joint manipulation. He's very, very good and very high level as far as jiu-jitsu is concerned. Now, I think this fight's going to be a knockout.
Yeah.
Who's going to knock out who is anybody's best guess, but I'm leaning towards Pavlovich. I think he's had a little bit more experience with the upper echelon of competition. He's been in there with the knockout king like Derek Lewis. He's been in there with Curtis Blades, and he's proven that he can get finishes against the best of the best. And Tom Aspinall, while he's proven that he's a finishing machine, we haven't quite seen it against the elite of the elite. And so in a fight that's so razor close like this, that's the only thing I'm leaning to, and that's going to make me pick Pavlovich by TKO finish, just given the experience level, and he's got the proven track record of beating the guys at the highest level.
Yeah, those are all great points. And the UFC is certainly the highest level of the sport, but once you get there, you realize there are, in fact, levels to the game. And Sergei Pavlovich has been the top guy for quite a while now. I mean, he's been the alternate for a couple of heavyweight title fights over the past, 18 months or so. And I remember seeing him in person. It looked like he wouldn't be able to fit through a standard doorway. Like, he's just massive. And I've never seen Tom Aspinall. I'm sure he's roughly around the same size, but there's a couple of things that stick out to me about this when you're talking about betting on it or, how you see this fight going, prediction-wise, whatever. This is not one you want to bet on, and this is one where if you do predict it wrong, it's okay. Don't be hard on yourself. This is a crazy fight, and anything can happen at heavyweight. What I do think is going to be Tom Aspinall's keys to victory is the fact that he's very fast. Anybody that weighs over 200 pounds, over 225 pounds, has the ability to knock somebody out with one single punch. But oftentimes we see guys weighing in right at the top limit of heavyweight, around 265. Maybe they live their life around 270 to 280, and they're just slightly slower than the guys that are a little bit smaller than them. And Tom Aspinall, in my opinion, is the perfect athletic frame for a heavyweight. He looks great when he's in there in the octagon. He doesn't look depleted. He doesn't look like he's been trying to put on size just for the sake of carrying extra weight. And I think that's a part of the reason he's so light on his feet. I think that's part of the reason he's able to exploit a lot of these bigger guys is with his speed and with his fast feet and his good footwork. So I, like you, think this fight is going to end in a finish, likely a KO or TKO, but I'm going to go with Tom Aspinall. I think the speed is going to be his secret weapon here. Sergei Pavlovich is certainly a durable fighter, but when you're talking about 5 rounds and these guys are so big, they're going to be bringing a good pace for each other from the start of the fight to the very end. I just see somebody getting slept, and I'm kind of leaning toward Tom Aspinall becoming the interim champion.
Yeah, well, the speed definitely will make a difference, and Tom is lightning fast, in and out, with not just with the punches, but with the footwork as well, how he creates angles.
So clean.
I just think Sergei is going to be able to get in there and let his experience carry him through to a finish. But this one's a pick'em fight. Like you said, I'm not going to place a bet on this one because anything can happen at heavyweight, especially when you're talking about 2 absolute finishing machines like these 2 guys. Now, I want to kind of talk about the interim aspect of this fight, which I don't particularly love because I feel like Stipe is odd man out right now. He's like the kid that nobody wants to play with. He just got pushed to the side because John Jones is injured, and we certainly want to see John Jones in there competing and defending his belt. But this feels like it could almost be like a Colby Covington situation where he becomes the interim champion, or one of these 2 gentlemen become the interim champion, and then they just get sidelined so John and Stipe can fight for the undisputed. And then really what purpose does the interim belt hold at that point? Because usually the interim belt means the champion's hurt, 2 people are going to fight, and they're going to sort out who's the person that's fighting the champion when he comes back. But it still seems to me like the UFC wants to keep that Stipe versus Jones fight. And for me, I'm the biggest Stipe Miocic fan you'll find. I think he's one of the best heavyweights of all time, if not the best heavyweight of all time. But Stipe's over 40 years old. He has had long periods of inactivity, and I personally don't think that him versus John Jones is all that competitive. And John told us, I'm not here for a long time anymore. We may see John 1 or 2 at the maximum more times before he calls it a career. Personally, I'd rather see him fight the winner of this fight than fight Stipe. I think it's a lot more competitive. I think it's a lot more fair in the sense of who's deserving. Now, Stipe is always deserving because of his accolades and whatnot, but I think the person that wins this fight, be it Aspinall or Pavlovich, would take Stipe's position as the most deserving person to contend for that undisputed belt against Jones.
Yeah, and I agree with all of what you're saying. And when you're looking at it from John Jones' perspective, it makes sense. Stipe is currently the heavyweight GOAT. Nobody's really going to deny that, especially on the active roster. But Stipe hasn't fought in so long, and it almost feels like he's out of the sport. Like he'd been retired, and I'm sure there's hundreds of people on the UFC's roster that have fought more frequently and even multiple times since Stipe's fought his last fight. But on paper right now, he is the best thing legacy-wise for John Jones to grab a hold of and fight. And I think it would be an easier fight than Aspinall or Pavlovich. But John also has to remember that these guys are still very young in their career, and one of these guys could wind up being a more dominant champion, being a better draw, being a more impressive heavyweight GOAT than Stipe Miocic, and the fact that he doesn't get him a little bit early, kind of like the Canelo Alvarez versus Floyd Mayweather move, would be a mistake that he could look back on later in his life. Now, as it sits right now, Tom Aspinall and Sergei Pavlovich are peanuts compared to Stipe Miocic as far as legacy goes. And in the heavyweight, grand scheme of things, Stipe is the guy you want to take off and put on your resume over either of these guys. But it just seems like the world does not want John Jones and Stipe Miocic to get locked into a cage together, and it's going to take all sorts of acts of God for this to actually happen. And that's why I'm kind of bummed that this is an interim fight. I feel like these guys should have taken the same route that the light heavyweights took. And it was such a breath of fresh air when that belt started just changing hands. You almost forgot who the champion was at one point. Jamal Hill gets it, and 2 weeks later he's giving it up. And then, Yuri Prochazka's giving it up after he gets his belt. The heavyweights for a lot of reasons, are the slowest moving division of all divisions in the UFC. Obviously, they take the biggest damage because they have the biggest hands and the biggest shots. They are bigger guys, so they literally move slower than everybody else. But also the division moves too slow. And if this interim fight takes place, that means that the winner fights the champion. But the champion has a date with Stipe Miocic, and that's not going to be contested until, at the very minimum, halfway through next year.
Right.
So now we're talking about two guys that should not be on ice. One of them is Sergei Pavlovich, who's fighting and also weighing in for alternate positions, is looking to stay active. He's in the prime years of his life. He does not need to be sitting out for a year just to wait for title fights. And Tom Aspinall, who's coming off a very serious injury on his leg, the last thing he wants to do is sit on ice for another 6-8 months. So I think it'd be really important to keep these two guys active, and making this an undisputed title rather than an interim title will be the best way to do that. Because if we do interim and then they get the winner of Stipe versus Jon Jones, you're talking about this time next year before that fight actually gets contested between interim champion and undisputed champion. And who knows what is going to happen between now and then as far as Tom Aspinall, Sergei Pavlovich, Stipe Miocic, Jon Jones. Anything could happen. You could have retirements. You could have more injuries take place. I just feel like the UFC needs to go ahead and strap this up as the undisputed title fight, forget the interim business, and then put Jon Jones or Stipe Miocic in for an immediate title shot, regardless of who wins.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine Jon Jones coming out of the blue corner and walking out first? I mean, and Pavlovich or Aspinall is standing there as the champion. How cool would that be? Now, I know Francis Ngannou said that he would welcome Stipe into the PFL cage, so maybe the UFC will release him and Stipe can... Honestly, that would be a better route, truthfully, for the heavyweight division. Yeah,
nobody wants to see that.
He's going to fight Jon Jones for more money. But as far as fans are concerned in the heavyweight division as a whole, give Stipe his trilogy match. Let him try to take Francis out and get the upper hand on that, and let Jon Jones move on with the winner of Pavlovich and Aspinall. That's total wishful thinking. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But I just think that, and I'm going on here, but it should be for an undisputed belt. Both of these guys are too skilled to be competing for an interim belt.
I agree with you. Let's not let Stipe and Jon steal all the thunder from these two guys. This, in my eyes, is the undisputed belt, even if they throw the word interim in front of it. And I think we could see a great rematch or trilogy potentially between these two heavyweights.
No doubt.